All right, so as you guys have heard, Toronto's pre-construction market is a complete disaster. In fact, I wouldn't even call it a disaster. It's not even a market. There is no market, right? It's basically just a bunch of people getting wrecked is pretty much what it is. So I have a article here from stories.com. I'm going to go over the latest sales numbers from April and give you my thoughts and opinions. So GTA new home sales hit another, in parentheses, historic low, surpassing 1990 downturn. So a mere 310 new home sales were recorded across the entire GTA in April. 310. The seventh consecutive month that sales hit historic lows, surpassing the infamous 1990 downturn. And for context, a typical April would historically see around 2,750 new home sales. So this is, almost 10% of the normal amount of sales this month would see. Compared to last year, sales were down 72% in April and sat 89% below the 10-year average. The majority of sales were made up of new single-family homes, which totaled 205, sliding 66% year over year. New condos made up the remaining 105 sales, a bleak 80% drop from April 2024 and 94% below the 10-year average. So 105 sales probably isn't even enough sales to launch a project, right? Because you probably have, you might have like a low rise that's like 150 units. So maybe they launched one project, right? But probably not. So here you have single family homes in the turquoise, and I'm going to call this color here salmon, right? So you have single family homes here, you have condos right here. And as you can see, 105 sales. And look at 2021 when you contrast those 2 years. Almost 4,000 sales. Right now we're at 105. That's like, 2,500% more sales, something like that, in 2021 in comparison to today. So that's insane, right? This is what I mean when I say there is no market. That's not a market when there's 105 sales. So this guy says, we saw interest rates starting to come down, then the market starts to stabilize. It looks like demand is starting to come back, and then you get tariff and economic uncertainty, and everyone's concerned and pulling back to see what happens. And that is what happened. January was good. Things looked like, they were getting back to normal. And then the whole tariff thing happens, and it's just boom, market completely died. Before tariff mania kicked in, January saw a promising uptick in new home sales, but by February, sales had plunged back down, posting the worst February on record. But as Build often points out in their reports, a slow new home market doesn't just mean less profit for builders. It's a harbinger of future supply gaps and skyrocketing price for Canadian home buyers. So this is what happens. This is what I've been talking about. When you have probably not even one project getting launched this month because of how little sales are happening, this is supply that would be available 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? Because you launch a project, you get enough sales, you get your financing, then you start building it. Low rise takes maybe 1.5 years, 2 years to build. Concrete, 3, 4, 5 years. So, anything that isn't getting launched right now would have been supply in 2027, 2028, 2029. And as a result, if literally nothing is getting launched, that means there's going to be literally no supply in 2028 and onwards, right? If you're seeing a downturn in sales, what that means is you have a whole series of projects that should be coming down the pipe that are either being delayed or just not progressing at all because they're not financially viable. On top of that, the population will continue to expand in the interim, and by 27-29, the period in which the supply gap will begin to take hold, demand is going to be there and housing is not. So I screenshotted this. I'll put it up on the screen. Jordan Skrinko's Instagram. PR growth. So permanent residence by country of citizenship. We had 104,000 new PRs in Q1, which I believe is a lot lower than what we were getting in 22-21. But that's still 400-something thousand people, 416,000 people by the end of the year. Now, we have a lot of people leaving the country too, but on a net basis, the population is still growing, right? And if there's literally no new housing and the population is growing, well, like this guy's saying, demand will be there and housing will not be there, right? So returning to the April data, inventory ticked down from 21,700 to 21,300, but remains well above the average levels at 15 months of inventory, which includes roughly 16,000 condos and 4,800 single family dwellings. So back to this chart here, red, I don't know what that is, but you have condos here at 16,500. Inventory is a lot higher than it was 2018, 2019, but not as high as it was in 2013 and 14, apparently. And then you see single family homes down here, which is still not above its 2018, 2019 highs. And this is why, despite everything that's going on, I'm still relatively positive about single family homes because the inventory isn't necessarily high. It's higher than what it was a few years ago, but it's not as high as it was in 18-19, and it's not as high as it was nowhere near as high as it was in 2013 and 2014. And now we have a lot more people living here. Every year we knock them down, we replace them with condos and townhomes. So I still think that land, we might even see price gains in land next year, right? Just because supply is not that high. But you look at condos, that is some high supply. And again, this is Toronto, right? This isn't BC. The GTA continued to see new home values fall in April, with the benchmark prices for both single family and condos falling year over year. Condos fell 3.6% to $1,019,000. So that's your benchmark price of a new condo in Toronto. It's over $1 million, right? Single family homes fell 5.4% to 1.5 million. Obviously $1.5 million, but I think that's roughly the price of a house in Surrey. So it's actually not too crazy. And if you look at this chart, the rise in price seems to be a lot more pronounced, or at least in a much shorter time frame on single family. It looks like the rise and correction is steeper than what it was in condos here. Yesterday, the federal government tabled its proposed measure to provide GST relief to first-time new home buyers. Unfortunately, this limitation to first-time buyers only will have a very small impact, as very few home buyers are first-time buyers. It will not substantially help address affordability, nor will it help significantly stimulate sales and construction. So I said that this was a huge deal, and it is if you fall into that category of a first-time buyer looking to buy a new home. This is a significant help to you. However, for the other 95% of the market, it probably won't do much at all, right? This isn't going to save the market. It's not going to save construction, but it helps. And I still think it's a step in the right direction. I still think that it was good that they finally did something about the taxes to at least help stimulate some construction and at least help the first-time home buyers, right? The government has reaped billions in additional tax revenue on new homes by not indexing GST price rebate thresholds since 91, and has instead created a new mechanism that will apply to very few purchasers. In order to have maximum impact and address the effects of HST on eroding home affordability, the federal government must broaden the scope of GST measures to all new home purchases. So I just found out a negative of this, right? Let's say you bought a pre-sale last year, and let's say you had a plan to flip it, which I don't condone. And if you did that, probably wasn't going to happen anyways at this point, but let's just say you did. Well, now the person who buys your assignment, because that presale was purchased before May 27th, will not get the GST rebate, right? Again, consult an accountant. But now, as a buyer looking to buy new construction, why would you buy an assignment and pay GST on it? You wouldn't. You would just go buy something already built from a builder and not pay the GST, or you would just buy a presale and not pay the GST instead of somebody else's assignment, which you now have to pay GST on. So for all the people who are looking to assign their contract, which was pretty much already impossible, now it's almost definitely impossible because the buyer, again, not an accountant, and the way I understand it, has to pay the GST on that assignment, and they don't if they go buy from a builder. So some knock-on effects there. Sherwood says there are a number of other federal measures which he feels are only getting in the way of development. One such measure being the foreign buyer ban. I agree, which he says is critical to facilitating new housing development. The reality is foreign buyers are a critical financing mechanism for getting new housing and especially condos built. Once those condos are built, the foreign buyers either rent it out, which adds to the rental stock, or they're going to live in it, or they're going to sell it. And I agree, right? I don't see any downside from letting foreign buyers purchase pre-sales, right? They're not taking away supply. They're increasing the supply and they're increasing jobs, right? The more housing gets built, the more jobs there are for people in construction, all these other things, right? Even if they buy a presale and rent it out, like he said, they're increasing the rental stock. But not only that, all of the other units that maybe wouldn't have gotten built without those foreign buyers helping the developer hit financing requirement, well, all those other units exist now that people can buy or buy to rent out. It just overall helps lower the rate of growth in the housing market. It doesn't push up the prices. It's actually slowing the price growth in the housing market. The problem that we have in terms of getting housing supply and housing built in Canada is not because we have a shortage of builders. So to have a new government builder added to the mix isn't going to solve the problem. The government should be focusing on clearing the regulatory barriers that are holding back the industry from providing the supply that is required. So there you have it, man. I mean, the GTA new construction market, condos, 105 sales. That is a disaster. Now, if you're watching this from BC, it's nowhere near this bad over here. There are pockets that are bad. There are people losing money. There are people losing their deposits, but it's not like the market still exists. There's still pre-sales selling. There's still pre-sales hitting their financing commitment. People are closing on their pre-sales and not losing their absolute shirt. That is happening, but it's not happening anywhere close to this scale like it's happening in Toronto right now. Now, if you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe. If you want to chat with me about buying or selling in the Fraser Valley, link down in the description. Otherwise, I'm that Agent Kelly. I'm making moves to move you. Peace.